If you would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Sorry. Flag's over there.
This, it's over there.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Roll call, please.
Alderman Becker.
Here.
Alderman Rucker.
Here.
Alderman Ross.
Here.
Alderman Rose.
Here.
Alderman Osteen.
Here.
Mayor Harmonson.
Here.
Alderman Schuman.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm gonna turn this over to Gina Woods, the city administrator. It's a presentation and discussion on the Osage Beach Park Master Plan.
Yes,
Gina,
Mayor,
please.
members of the board. So hopefully you either brought your copies from January 17th or we do have the PowerPoint that Dave and Darren will be going through. On January 19th, we had a discussion presenting kind of the first draft of update on public comments and presented what was put together, and the Board of Aldermen had asked to have a workshop so we can dive more into the details and answer your questions and how they got this far. Like with any master plan, this can be a working document. Eventually, like all master plans, this will help guide us in whatever financial commitments, now and in the future budgets, will help us guide us in that position, just like we did. Our very first park master plan was done in 1990 to 2000. And as you know, several things got prioritized and completed, and other things, as times changed, didn't. So this is an important update for that. So we're not going to solve maybe all the financial questions or how we proceed, but hopefully at the end, this can be a document that is a good goal in mind and that will, again, help guide through future budgets or commitments to the park as the Board of Aldermen see fit. So this is your time to ask questions and have all the details. And with that, I'm just going to turn over to Darren and Dave to kind of catch us up, and then however the mayor wants to run the Q&A.
Very good. All right, thank you.
So if it's red, that means you can hear me? Is that it?
Yeah.
It gets recorded? Just had to familiarize myself. Don't know if it's red or green. Thanks for inviting us back. We had not intended to go step by step through the PowerPoint that we went through at the last board meeting. Obviously, if that's something that we absolutely need to do, we could jump that onto, put it on a thumb drive and put it up there. But what I thought I would do is just go through two things before we kind of open it up and allow you to ask whatever questions that you would like to ask. First, the roadmap that we took to get here. We went ahead and started off with assessing the existing facilities, going ahead and doing a demographic assessment of the community, looking at participation rates of potential activities and existing activities. We went ahead and we did a public engagement process that included survey work, included focus groups and stakeholder meetings. One of those that was very important was visiting with staff, and it's great to see how invested the staff is in seeing this master plan be successful and be representative of the community. And from that, we went ahead and took all of that data and sort of rolled it into what the master plan is that you have in front of you. The city should be commended on undertaking a process like this, because it not only goes ahead and looks at statistical data, but it goes ahead and it looks at public input, and it also takes a third-party group like Cochran Engineering and Ballard King and Associates and sort of assembling it. And there's no, in that third-party analysis, there's no bias to that. So I think that's important thing to keep in the back of your mind as you're going through this. I think the other thing that's important with a master plan is it's a roadmap, right? It's not something that says you absolutely have to do this. It's going ahead and it's a snapshot in time using all of that data to say, here's where we think you guys could go ahead and head in the future. But that's not to say that there might not be pivot points along the way. So those were two things that I thought as we got into tonight and as we started off, I just kind of wanted to cover again so that we knew the steps that we took. I get asked that question on occasion. If you go ahead and if we adopt this master plan, does that mean we absolutely have to do everything that's in here? And some of you are smiling and smirking, and no, that's not what it means. It's simply saying we have some direction and now we know where we need to head. So With that, I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything to that, but we can go ahead and I know that Mr. Rucker, you had gone through and you had a lot of tabs in there, so that's always awesome to see when people actually get into the document and look at things that way. But this is your time to ask all those questions and understand the thought process and the philosophy that we came up with this document.
Thank you. And the one question I was having, and then if you don't mind, I was just going to kind of open this up and rather than waiting each time to be addressed like a normal board meeting, just answer questions, feel free and take turns, that sort of thing. But I think at the last meeting we talked about, have we ever figured what kind of revenue the city can generate, the canoe rates and the renting of the fields and all that? I think last meeting was in question how much we could over the next 10 years get back in funds.
That's a good question. I know when we went through here and we started talking about budgetary impact, we indicated that there was additional revenue that could be generated from those amounts, and we kind of gave it on a percentage basis. We hadn't gone through and looked at the exact dollar amounts. However, based on what we hear tonight, if that's something that we need to kind of go back and look at, and if we can earmark a dollar to that, that's completely reasonable to do.
Okay, very good.
Okay?
Board, go ahead, take turns, whatever, just, yeah. You want to go?
Well, I've got a number of questions, first of all, that I just want to go through and be happy if I'm on a question or a subject that one of the board wants to expand upon that, I think that would be maybe a way we can move right through. I don't want to just take the full night up.
Just to be clear, you don't have a flight to catch, right?
Right.
Okay.
I just want to say at the beginning, my kind of opening comments would be that my intent behind pushing for this meeting tonight was the fact that I don't like the idea that there are times that studies are done and they're really put together really nice, and 2 years later you take the dust and wipe it off of them and say, what did that say? What do we? And that aggravates me. Okay, so that's the first thing. I just want to put it right out on the table. What we will do with this plan, I don't know yet. Obviously, that's something that we need to kind of, in my opinion, that's one of the things tonight I hope we can do is we can gain some more knowledge from the board. We can start giving some staff directions from, us to having some generality things and letting them come up with some more specific things. And one of the comments that I will make up front is the fact that I understand we're dealing with the property that we're dealing with, at some point we need to look at what we can do with the property we have, and I think then we also need to say, well, what could we do if we had maybe additional 25 acres that somebody would give to us or we would buy, or how much more acreage do we need to do everything that's here? And that's kind of my general opening statement of what my thoughts are. So that's just wanted to put that out there. Funding is something else we need to discuss. I don't know how much of that we need to get into the weeds tonight, but I think that at some point we might need to, and there's a lot of different ways of funding. But first of all, how much kind of expense and what, when, where we have is probably we need to look at too. I have my proposal here, our plan, and I just go page by page of the items that I had, and I'll kind of let you know. I'm on page, and this is kind of screwy here because mine starts off page 39. Because I guess that was the packet
page numbers.
Yeah, that's the packet page. I think I got the other page. Page 3. That's my first question on page 3.
Thank you.
That's where you can follow it easier. On page 3, okay, you talk about the maintenance, the park maintenance facility, and you say you'd like to see it centrally located. Why? In the park.
Common practice of going ahead and trying to make it centrally located so you could go ahead and you could move things throughout the park and it creates distance and those types of things. That would be a personal preference. That's something that we've seen work well. There's nothing to preclude you from keeping it where it's at right now.
Okay. I just didn't know how much there was, because obviously to relocate that would be a greater expense rather than enhancing it, but I didn't know if there was I realize if you were starting from scratch, you'd put it in the center.
If I was starting from scratch, I'd put it in the center.
Okay, fair.
I'm sorry, are we talking about the maintenance building?
the maintenance building of the park.
Gotcha, okay.
Page 4. I picked up from what was said here that our signage is poor. That's what I visualized, what you're trying to say here. Is that a good analysis of what you're saying?
I think the signage could be improved, and in doing that, I think, especially with City Park, it's a long linear park. So by improving signage, it goes ahead and increases the awareness of what's throughout the park. But you're at a point where if you're going to make these changes, improving the signage at both parks, making sure that they have an appropriate theme that's consistent with the city, yes.
Along that line, when you say signage, first thing that I thought about was the sign that's on the parkway. But if you're talking about more wayfinding type signage of, okay, I'm here and I want to find X, well, the little sign on the pole that says, go this way to the kayaks, or this way to the fishing pond. Which kind of signage are we talking about?
I was sort of a blanket statement for everything. Let's go ahead, and if we're making this investment in the park, the signage that gets you into the park, and then once you're in the park, your wayfinding and where you're going.
Okay. I find the parkway signage I find somewhat sufficient, but maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, I did too. I assumed we were talking of the other one, because I thought, especially the one for the main park, I think it's,
It's just one of those that if you're starting from scratch, you'd go ahead and you look at it. If you feel that the signage to get into the parks is adequate and you can match that up with wayfinding that's within the park.
page 5. City Hall, never mind, I already answered, because we've got that on as far as how much available property there is at City Hall. And that is where we've got this plat that Carrie had given. I guess the question I have on that is, how much is available at City Hall? There is supposedly a total of plus or minus 10 acres. Do we know how much of that is available, though? I mean, because there's some of that we're using, because it's my understanding that this includes the whole chunk. So how much is available for us to possibly use? Do we know?
Well, I mean, the only uses that we have for it right now are the animal holding area back there and the little pavilion that we have there. And for that matter, that pavilion is kind of centrally located on the kind of flattest area up there. As it kind of dips off into a valley, and the terrain is very challenging in that area. And then, of course, it crosses the street into the little storage lot that we have that's right now full of dirt. But that'll change once Rob moves all that to our other site here coming up. But
Well, I guess the bottom line problem I have is this map that Carrie gave us says plus or minus 10 acres. And then when you look at it, it appears to me that maybe we've got about 2 acres where the city hall's at, and 15 acres, and that's 17 acres. So it's not a nitty gritty, but as we move forward, and because I'm going to want you guys to, I've got a question later on about this. I don't know how much there is, because this is kind of, and I don't expect the answer tonight, obviously, but it doesn't really tell us how much is available for us to be able to use for our parks or other stuff that, when I look at it. And that
I
was
can
kinda,
find out.
on this page here was kind of talking about, the use of City Hall for possibly the dog park, which I'm personally not in favor of, only because I visualize a dog park, and I'm not a dog person, I don't own a dog, but I visualize somebody wanting to take and use the dog park to where they would go to the big park, because they can go to the dog park and mom can go do something else, or mom and the kids can go do something else, and that kind of thing, as compared to a facility here that's a complete separate land. There's only one thing going on there, and that's just the dog park. That's just my
I will
take
tell-
on that.
My experience, because I do have dogs, and we
Okay.
go to dog parks if we travel. It doesn't matter, we're there for a dog park, and if it's by itself, we go to the dog park. Or,
Okay.
I mean,
yeah, I was going to say, we toured the one in Jefferson City, and it's a standalone. Now, they're getting ready to build a second one that will be attached to a larger park, but the one that they operate in Jefferson City right now, the only thing at that location is a dog park.
Okay. The only other thing that I would offer, just in terms of discussion point mindset, so you know what some of that background was, is that at one point we did have the discussion of could we go ahead and could there be a dog park at City Park? And one of the things that we did as we started to look at that in the amount that's going on in that space, you would have to go ahead and eliminate that last green field that's down there. And we really started to look at it from a perspective of if that's that heavily used for activities and then we put a dog park there, are we going ahead and are we overloading the park from a standpoint of usage? So that was when the option that, hey, there's some space behind City Hall, maybe we should go ahead and consider that. So that was at least the thought process behind it.
One of my thoughts would be that one of the things that I think is a standalone that could work back here is also a disc golf. I don't know how much acreage you need for disc golf as compared to how much for golf, dog park, and where you could do them both back there. Again, that comes down with how much acreage is there, but again, I just want to look at utilizing the acreage that we have. Okay? Page 6. Oh, never mind. Page 6 is what I just talked about. Page 8. The first paragraph, is that referring to the fact of the people wanting to see a swimming pool? Is that what you're looking at there?
No, under
Or do
the,
they want, because it says inside,
in the other comment section, there was, the first bullet point talks to a handful of stakeholders in a meeting about an indoor facility geared towards recreation. They were talking about it from a standpoint of an indoor recreation center, whether it was courts, fitness, those types of things. The idea of a pool came up frequently, but when they were talking about an indoor recreation facility, that had less to do with a pool and saying, we probably need more court space, maybe there needs to be a municipal fitness facility, indoor track, those kinds of things. It wasn't pool specific.
okay. The next bulletin under the holiday lights, this is an observation from my point. I think that we need to, as we are moving forward with the plans, et cetera, we need to allocate some more funds for the holiday lights. The holiday lights need to be upgraded if we're going to continue down that road. And I realize we're not in competition, but we are in competition. And I would just say that if you think what we have is okay, take a trip across the lake and go over to that park, and you will see that we need to, if we're going to be in that business of doing it, that's what we need to be doing from a budgetary standpoint and looking forward to that.
Alderman Rucker, just to piggyback on what you said, we had ordered $25,000 worth of lights, which ended up being how many lights?
I believe 8 or 9.
8 or 9. We had ordered those last year, and just because of supply chain issues, they just came in. And so we've already got 8 or 9 that are carryover from last year's budget that we're going to be using, and then we put 25,000 more in the budget in '23, and so we're also buying 25,000 more in lights this year. So over the last 2 years, and I don't think we spent all of it. It's probably close to like between 42 and 45,000 we've invested in probably a dozen or more new displays. And you're right, they are needed, because a lot of the displays that we have, we've had to cobble together between two that still have working parts and move things around. So that's a good observation.
Page 9, I'm concerned with your observation in reference to seasonal help. The comment there is you're saying that our 4 positions is equal to 1, and maybe we just ought to hire 1. That to me doesn't work well, because you need 4 bodies in the summer, not 1 year round. That's why I look at it. So I mean, that's really Parks manager to come forth with that, but I don't see that as a feasibility of something that would work, that you're going to take 4 part-timers and hire 1 full-timer. Just
Okay.
my observation there.
Hey, Kevin, I'm going to,
Sure.
one of my main questions, I'm going to pick up on what you just brought up, was we've got the cost analysis for the cost to add improvements, but I'm curious on who can provide us with how those improvements correlate into staffing and wages. A good example, splash pad. Obviously, that's going to require a designated employee to oversee that area, or if that improvement or comes to fruition, full-time, that is their main focus. So not that I have issues with any of these things that are being proposed, I'm just curious on how that plays into increased staffing and wages, as well as ancillary costs. Going back to the splash pad, I've had previous experience with public swimming pools, and the insurance liability on that is phenomenal. So I'm curious if we've ever, or who would be responsible for saying, you know what, if we want to go forward with something like a splash pad, who would contact our insurance agency to find out what would be our liability, how much would that increase our coverage, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. Those are great questions. The reason we didn't go ahead and didn't go down the route of a traditional swimming pool was because of some of the costs that were associated with that. Cost for construction, cost for staffing, liability insurance, those types of things. It doesn't eliminate the want from the public to go ahead and still have that opportunity to get wet, cooling, those types of things. When you're dealing with the splash pad, spray park, however you want to phrase it, it does not require, in the state of Missouri, it does not require a lifeguard. It does not require a full-time designated staff member. With the number of commercial and neighborhood pools in the area, you could go ahead and you could contract with one of those groups to go ahead and test the chemicals and refill and those kinds of things, so you wouldn't have to hire on some of that specialty labor. We can go ahead and go back and take a closer look at some of those expenses to go ahead and make sure that we're still in line and feel like we could go ahead and cover those. Part of the philosophy when we did this is going ahead and moving more of the active elements to one location and more of the passive elements to another location. That was a discussion with Eric and staff to say, okay, do we need to have some increases? Yeah, but can we do this in an economical fashion? But we can take a look at those numbers again, for sure.
Okay, I mean, there are certain things in here that automatically, to me, look like it would require designated staffing for.
Yeah.
The splash pad was one of them. The addition or building of a 20 by 40 pavilion that we would rent out for special occasions and events, to me, seems like we would need to have a designated employee that would be basically be responsible for booking those arrangements and those times, overseeing those events. Obviously, there's cleanup involved, setup, et cetera, et cetera. So I was just curious on who and how do we get something that's going to correlate to additional costs other than just the construction of these items?
Alderman, I can tell you that there's a splash pad, a park with a splash pad very near my in-laws in St. Louis, that St. Charles County has, and I don't believe they have a staff member there. It's very much like what they're proposing at Phoenix, and I want to say that there's one or two people there usually, but they're very much the volunteer kind of guides, but they're not any kind of lifeguard or park ranger or anything specialized. It's a welcome to the park, almost like a greeter type role, and it has a very similar. So I mean, I think the idea of a splash pad is that it doesn't require. I mean, this has some very shallow water elements in it, and there's no lifeguard on duty or anything like that. It's pretty similar to what they're talking about.
From an indoor perspective, and you're asking about liability insurance, I apologize, I'm just trying to make sure we make eye contact when we do this. What we've seen in the past is for indoor facilities, and they're really, there's some fluctuation between whether the indoor facility has a pool, doesn't have a pool. But when we're talking an indoor facility, we've seen liability insurance range from anywhere from 15 cents per square foot up to 35 or 40 cents per square foot in terms of an annual cost. Splash pads is one that I'm not as familiar with in terms of what that factor would be.
So it wouldn't require a designated staff member, is what I'm understanding, but then again, there's still ancillary costs. There's the insurance, there's obviously maintenance. You had mentioned something about we hiring out a third party and somebody who's going to maintain the water balance or whatever that's going to be, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just curious, just throwing out some.
And as we went through that, and as you go through some of those numbers, we've gone ahead and we've suggested a percentage of increase that could go ahead and could take place because of some of the additional amenities. We can go back with that and nail those numbers down a little bit more and directly correlate it back to some of the concerns that you have. That's not a problem.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
You were going to say something.
Specific to splash pads, I did speak to several vendors at the local, the recent.
Speak up, please.
Missouri Parks and Recreation Association. There was a lot of vendors there, and there's really two different kinds. There's the kind that recirculates the water, and it has to be treated and chlorinated like a swimming pool, and then there's a kind that has, some water pass through it, and it exits out into the sewer system. But the thing about them, from what I've seen, is they have timers on it, so it doesn't require staff. So if you're out there, you just turn it on, and it has a certain amount of time, and the water comes out, and then it's done, and it's not constantly running. So that's the direction I want to go if we decide to put in a splash pad, something like that.
Mike, make sure those microphones are on. Sorry. Thank you.
It's on now.
Kind of as a follow-up to what Bob was saying, and I had this later on, but now would be a good time to bring up. My comment is more broad. My comment is anything that we add to the park, whether we get it at this stage of the game or it's when staff starts to present it, we need to be able to say, we want to add this thing, pickleball, whatever it is, whatever. We want to add that. It's going to cost us X number of dollars to do. It's also going to cost us X number of dollars each year to maintain it. It's also going to cost us X number of dollars for a certain amount of staffing. That's the thing that I think we need to look at so that we don't get ourselves, our future boards don't get ourselves in a situation where next thing you know, we're like, well, we spent all this stuff and now we don't have enough money to pay for the staff, or now we don't have enough money to keep the maintenance. So we need to not just.
Keep it in control for each
Right,
item.
right. And that was something I had made a later on comment, but now is a good time to, I mean, you went into great detail with the splash pool, but it really need to do it with
Well,
anything.
overall, I'm using that as an
Yeah.
example.
Yeah,
yeah.
A lot of these, like I said, like the pavilion that we want to rent out, generate revenue, well, that's going to require somebody who's going to be in charge of booking
Yeah.
and keeping a calendar for that.
Yeah.
And, you know what I'm saying, it's going to obviously require some additional staffing. I just don't know what that is going to be.
We can go back through there and on those items where it looks like there's a significant addition, okay, there's the upfront capital, but then there's some general comments in here, we can get down and drill down a little bit more specific. So that's not a problem.
And that's why at the very beginning, there is a way to find out how much possible revenue they will generate, it'll help offset those costs, yeah. The rentals and all that.
One other comment that I would make too is from the tours that Eric and I have done, what we're seeing is that a lot of these splash pads just have cameras. And so that go back to dispatch. And so if there is an issue, then dispatch can then notify the park or whatever, or notify the police or whatever needs to happen. And we do actually have camera upgrades scheduled for this year for both parks anyway. So just something to consider, because that's something that we're moving in the direction of.
Moving on to page 10. Again, just some observations. We talk about volunteers. I think that's a good thing. I would tell you from my previous involvement in a number of different organizations, Boy Scouts, civic organizations are great. You know, a lot of times the scouting people are looking for things like that for merit badges and stuff that they need. So there's some possibility there for you that you could be looking at, Eric. Also, from a standpoint of youth groups, I was again with my church group, we looked at servant events to get these kids out. The kids of today don't know what it's like to give back. And we need to give we need to help them to do that. And there's ways they can do that by giving back to the community. Also, when I look at, the other thing is, and we talk about naming of the parks and some possible financial assistance there. Also, something that, again, I'm not familiar on how to do it, but how difficult would it be for us to get an endowment fund set up, or get an endowment, do the necessary things for an endowment if we get somebody that wants to donate to the park and stuff. I would just tell you, went through this a number of years ago in our church, and we found out we had a whole bunch of stuff to do, and unfortunately somebody came to us in November and they wanted to get rid of some money, and we didn't have the wherewithals to do it in that short of time. So we missed out on a possible endowment. Because when people got to get rid of their money, a lot of times they've got to get rid of it in a timely fashion because of tax reasons. So I don't know how difficult it is to have that ahead of time or whatever, but it's a thought on where we can get some funding.
That was in page 10, to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, that it's 50-50. Some people go ahead and feel comfortable giving that money direct to the city to go ahead and say, here, can we go ahead and create an endowment with this? In some cases, there's other groups that aren't as comfortable giving it to a municipality, which is why we had made the comment in there about the Friends of the Park organization that's a 501c3, and that you go ahead and that dollars can funnel through there, whether it's donations, whether it's endowments, whether it's special events. I think all of those are great ideas. I think the one area, and it piggybacks on everything that has just been said in terms of funding, is making sure that whatever folks are giving you money towards, that you know how they want it used. And if they give you dollars to build X, that you know what's the staffing cost, what's the replacement cost, so that if you're going to get locked into something long-term through a donation, you understand that.
Good point.
I do have a comment. This is going to sound very facetious. A lot of this is talk about new paved walkways and pedestrian bridges. Maybe we should sell bricks.
That's,
Jefferson City did that.
If you know where I'm going with that.
Yes.
I'm not saying this to
Do you really want to go there?
be facetious,
Not
but
tonight.
it's something I thought, obviously, that's something we could actually look into for some of these new paved walkways at the dog park or the pedestrian bridge that's going in.
Jefferson City did that at the base of that bridge that they put onto Adrian's Island, and they were getting $1,000 for a brick a little bit smaller than a piece of paper. But they also have a Parks Foundation, to what he was saying.
I think it's a, I think it's a good idea, and obviously you know where I'm pulling that one from.
I do.
okay, I guess, well, I have a comment on page 11, only from the fact of the dog park and about the use of visitors, and I've heard visitors. Again, I just want to reiterate that back, then that means we need to do some marketing, or we need to do some awareness, or we need to think about that as we put these different things in. And if we're going to do a dog park back here at City Hall, and we have visitors that are coming to hotels and motels, et cetera, again, we need to make sure we make
Publicity, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
do things to make that people aware of it.
I think that was one of the things that was pretty interesting with their stakeholder meetings, is when you start talking about the convention and visitors group that we went ahead and mentioned. You know, they're not only going ahead and bringing those events and opportunities to the city, to the region, but the number of inquiries that they get just in terms of, well, I want to do this with my kids, or I want to do this with my family when it's visiting. They're almost a clearinghouse of information. So I would think even before you go ahead and before you implement any of this stuff, making sure that what's available in the two parks is out there and easily accessible is a very easy and implementable step that's going to cost you nothing.
And we already partner with CVB and Tri-County already in an advertising program, so
Yep.
how much granular level you want to advertise on, whether it's as big as billboards or commercials, but also maintaining that landing page at funlake.com is another very important avenue that you can get very specific onto.
Page 14, rather have a problem with this, because my problem is the fact that down at the bottom, we say we had a 4.7% increase between 2010 and 2020, but when we projected our growth to 2027, and we looked at what we have from 20 to 22, we show the population going down. How did you come up with?
So we use a service called ESRI, Environmental Systems and Research Institute, and they go ahead and they provide those projections for us. So that was the information that they went ahead and provided. Now, that being said, the city has different projections that they would prefer we use in terms of population growth. We're happy to go ahead and include those in a report. But I don't produce those numbers. I go ahead and I say, here's my service area, give me that population, and that's where we go from there.
I think they're wrong,
One
obviously.
of the tasks that I have, Mitch, who's our new economic development specialist, one of the tasks that he is on right now is really perfecting our community profile and those estimates, not just with Esri, but other data sources that we have at our hand. So I would be happy to direct him to assist because I'm already got him on a big data analyzing project right now for some of these same reasons, so.
Well, it's kind of, for me, it's kind of difficult to be saying we're going to be doing some of these things and we're looking at a downward trend in population. I just don't think that that's,
I think the other thing that we have to take into account here is that the census was done in 2019.
No, these are projections, so.
Well, I mean, we had COVID hit right after that, and so the point I make is that a lot of things could have changed since, over the last 3 years.
okay. We're going to jump page 26. We're talking about the information that was gathered on outdoor activities. And my concern or question is the fact that we've got a number of these things listed in the basically how popular they are, et cetera, et cetera. But there's two things that we've been talking about: pickleball, not even on the list; disc golf, not even on the list. So these are two things that we've got in our thing that we're talking about maybe doing, but yet they're not on this list of even being what appears to be a popular event.
That list of activities, again, goes ahead and is produced by Esri because they go ahead and they do some annual surveying. So that's based on that information. If you go ahead and as you go further into it, there is information on pickleball, there is information on Frisbee that's in there. It's
I
not
see
on,
that later here.
it's not on this chart because it wasn't available from this data source.
Okay, because when you look at page 32, which we talk about indoor activity, we've got basketball on there that we're talking about removing from outdoor, and we've got soccer on there that we're talking about, and I guess these are indoor activities that they're wanting, but then they do have pickleball on here. So I guess, so do I come up with the analogy that pickleball is not good outdoor, but it's good indoor?
I'm sorry, what page number were you? For 32, I had a
32.
sports summary.
National Summary Sports Participating for
Indoor activities.
indoor. No.
I have the sports part.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have the sports participation that gives the national rank. Yeah, on the previous pages, there's some indication of indoor and outdoor. So when you're going through this,
So this is just sports? This is not, this is just like a league?
This is all sports and just interest
give
is the way I
me,
perceive
give
it.
me just a second, okay? If you go ahead and if you go to, your first question was on page 26. That's information that's produced from a national survey that Esri goes ahead and does. And it just gives us, it kicks out that data. It's for adult participation only. As you go ahead and as you move into page 28, those percentages is data that's produced by the National Sporting Goods Association. They produce that on an annual basis. So we're able to go ahead and create that unique participation number for the city of Osage Beach. As you go on to page, and when we have outdoor, indoor, and then other added there. As you move on to page 30 and page 31, it takes that unique percentage and applies it to your population. So it's not going ahead and it's not necessarily saying good, bad, right, or wrong. What it's doing, it's giving you an idea of what the market is for potential participation if you have those types of amenities in an indoor facility or in your park.
In Osage Beach?
Correct. Those numbers are specific to, so for instance, if you go to page 30 and you look at exercise walking, right? You look down at that average and it says 43.3%. based on the age distribution within your community, based on your geographic location, and based on your income level, we average those 3 unique participation percentages with the national number. So it's your age distribution, your location, your income level, averaged with the national number to give you that unique 43.3%. We then apply that to the population age 7 and older. So that's what that 2020 population, 2022 and 2027 is saying. That number of people age 7 and over could potentially participate in that activity from the city of Osage Beach.
Darren, one thing I want to ask too, so if, go back to our previous conversation, if we would drill down to those data set estimates with numbers that we feel meet our community,
Correct.
then that would also change all these tables because they are tied to somewhat of your estimates.
In terms of total population, it would go in age distribution, it could have an impact. I don't know if it's not going to have an impact on your geographic location. It sort of is what it is, right?
Right.
As we said, or NRP, National Sporting Goods Association says you're in the Midwest region. If you were able to come up with additional information on median household income, that could potentially put you in another range, but you're talking like they're going 50,000 to 75,000.
Was more talking about the projected
Yeah.
increase of population.
It could go ahead and impact those numbers, yes. And would be happy to go ahead and revise those if you have different projections. That's not an issue at all.
I realize we don't have to go exactly by these numbers, but these are numbers that should help guide us. And I realize numbers don't make it, it's not everything, because at some point in time, you got to say, okay, what's the real world? But
Correct. And I think the other thing that's important when you're looking at these numbers is we're not suggesting that if you build a pickleball court, you're going to have that many people using your pickleball court. We're saying that's the market that you have for potential participation.
I was going to say, a lot of the data that you provided plays into a national statistic. And where on that chart is water skiing, where on that chart is fishing, where on that chart is boating. You do not see those on those charts because, once again, we're looking at things on a national level. Therefore, on a national level, those aren't high priority extracurricular activities or entertainment or things people do.
The Nationals numbers
So the
don't
Nationals-
identify our niche.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Yep.
So you've got to take all that data with a grain of salt and really, like you said, hone in on, for our specific area, what is going to be popular or what is projecting we think will be popular.
And what I would offer to the group is that there's no silver bullet to go ahead and to identify specifically what that market is or what that thing is, right? However, what I would offer is that our company's been in business for 30 years, and this is about as good of a system as we've been able to come up with to kind of drill down to what that market is and to base your decisions on. Understanding that, yes, the Lake of the Ozarks, Osage Beach is going to skew in a couple areas because of what you have around you.
now that I've asked that simple question, you've given me a whole bunch more knowledge.
I hope that's a good thing.
Understanding that
Sure.
flow of that chart. I appreciate that.
One other thing I'll add too is, and Darren had alluded to this in the beginning, is that that's just one piece of the puzzle, because, you know, he also talked to staff, and I think if you talk to Eric or if you talk to Jake, our recreational specialist, they'll tell you that when they get phone calls from citizens locally, they are mostly asking, where's the pickleball courts? And so it's not just the data that you're looking at here, it's also the information that this guy right here is getting on his voicemail or in his email, or when he picks up the phone and answers a citizen's call. So we're not just looking at that big picture, we're taking that big picture and we're melding it with some of the local data to try and give the best information we can on what direction the public wants us to go in.
Overwhelmingly, last year, I don't remember the number of calls we received if we had pickleball courts. We do technically have a pickleball court in Phoenix. It's a multi-use court. It's not ideal. We don't have a storage place over there to store the net and the paddles, so we have to keep it at the concession stand. Oh, sorry.
People online can't hear you.
Sorry. And then just about every weekend in the summertime, we have people check out our equipment. And 99% of the time, they're from out of town. They're here for the weekend, and they want to go play pickleball. We do plan on installing 2 pickleball courts this year where the sand volleyball is. There's a lot of positive feedback on that, a lot of happy people. So talking to people every day, pickleball courts, dog park, additional parking, dogs, there's so many people that walk dogs in City Park. So that's kind of where the dog park came into play, which I think it's very.
Is pickleball, I don't play it, I'd like to play it, but is it more popular as an inside sport or an outside sport?
I think both. It is the fastest.
I know they play it at the Y.
Yes.
But I'm thinking
We
in the
play it,
summertime.
we have a league at our church that meets every Thursday night.
At night? I mean, do they
Inside.
play it outside?
No,
or-
no, we have an indoor.
Indoor. And I'm thinking in the summer, as hot as it is, I mean, it's a great exercise to be out there, but I just wondered as far as what would be the actual response of where would be the best, inside or outside?
Like a lot of sports, there's a couple things to know about pickleball. And I don't have a horse in this race, so let me go ahead and say that. And I own a set of pickleball paddles, but my boys and I go out there and just see how hard we can hit the ball. It's not about going ahead and winning the game. That being said, the social aspect of pickleball is as much part of the game as the game itself. We met recently with a group in the city of Columbia, Missouri, and their preference is to be outside playing. However, it's Missouri. Do you really want to be outside in July and August? And what you see is the daytime shift, right? All of a sudden, the majority of the people that are playing are retired or have a pretty flexible life, so they can go ahead and get up early and get out of the heat. But if they can play it outside, they're going to play it outside until the weather goes ahead and pushes them indoors.
Of course, the problem with being indoors, we got to think about air conditioning and the cost, and so that jumps the price up. I just thought I'd bring that up for whatever it was worth.
As I said, there's already an option to do that at the Y, so.
Yeah.
I think that these
Right.
new courts are going to be very well received, and everybody that I've talked to about it, they're very excited about it, so.
Perfect.
Page 34, getting into the online survey, the second bullet point, I'm rather interested with that. Is that what you saw in those numbers there? Is that generally what you see? Are we higher? Are we lower? Just as a generalization, I was just wondering about that.
Just so we make sure we're talking about the same thing. You're talking about the response that says individuals that go to City Park were asked to identify all the amenities that they and their household use. And then we go
it says
ahead and we
when asked
provide.
about Peonic Park, it gave the different percentages and stuff. I'm just wondering if is that shocking that it was a bunch, heavy or light, or we in the middle, or?
I wasn't overly shocked by any of the numbers that came back on the survey. When you go ahead and you start talking about parks, you have to look at it from a seasonality perspective. You have to talk about it from the standpoint of you have some high-use activities that are in there that go ahead and drive parking and make things uncomfortable at times when you have things like baseball, but they might be playing 1 or 2 times a week where you've got somebody who's in there walking every day. So none of the numbers were shocking in any way. I thought they were unique to the city. I also thought they were reflective of your population and what you have going on in your community.
So in other words, you wouldn't be throwing a lot of money at doing advertisement and figuring on really boosting them up, because this is probably about what you're going to get, is what I was kind of trying to just see how much money we wanted to throw at the advertising of it.
I think that going ahead and increasing the awareness of what's going on or what's available, I don't ever think that's a bad thing, but I think going ahead and being reasonable about it. One of the things that is interesting to go ahead and talk about because of the amount of tourists that come to the area is you're really trying to respond to the needs of your residents, right? But it would be foolish to think that there's not a significant amount of non-resident use of your facilities. So making sure that you're really focusing on what residents are looking for and making that information available. And then if you have some low-cost ways to go ahead and increase the level of awareness for those that are visiting would probably be an appropriate approach.
And then I think it's, there's a comment at the bottom about improved cell service response. I had mentioned that the other night at the meeting, and Alderman Ross and I was having a conversation over the last number of days, and I think what he brought up may, shed some good light on it. In this report, more than a couple times, it talks about our cell service is not any good at the parks.
Internet or cell?
Well, yes.
Okay, we were talking about internet.
Internet, but I
Okay.
think internet are both, okay? And Mike had indicated we have real good service. Well, I think what this report is talking about is the park users, and what maybe you were talking about was the employee and our facilities. But I think that what this report is saying is that, we don't have good service down there, and as we move forward, if that's something we need to look at, I do believe there's value in having good, service. Even to one, like my son's a disc golfer, and his comment was, "Oh, you gotta have internet and cell service out there." I said, "Well, why?" He said, I got a program on my phone that tells me, it helps me which disc to use, and tells me where's that other basket's at if I can't see it." He said, "If you don't have good internet service," I'm like, okay,
So just a couple of comments there. For one thing, Alderman Rucker, no, I was referring to the park patrons. We have free internet that we get through the Camden County Library. They put it in. It is good internet. It's through T-Mobile. Now, the one thing I will say is that
Does it reach all the way to the lake access?
no.
Well, then there's your respondents, that some of them are
Then
outside the
maybe
area.
that's it.
maybe that's where it's coming from.
Maybe that's where it is, because it is around the soccer fields and the baseball fields and around up
Other
near the
areas of the
pond.
park, someone's not getting service, so therefore they're.
That could very well be it, yes. But we also have internet that our employees can use that is a little bit more restrictive through the building. Both of those services are good. Now, the one thing I will say about the cell service is I've been a T-Mobile user for years, and it wasn't until Sprint and T-Mobile merged that the service improved down at the park. For many, many years, unless you had AT&T, you weren't going to get service at City Park. But that changed I'd say about 18 months ago. And now the service is pretty good down there. And I still have T-Mobile on my personal phone. It's always been good with my city phone with AT&T service, though.
Could I add to that? Sure. So a couple of questions. One, do we have that same type of, I realize that it doesn't go all over the city park, but do we have that same type of free Wi-Fi at Phoenix and that facility?
No.
Okay. And I think that Kevin and I talked about this. In general, the younger folks and even us older folks are starting to use free Wi-Fi as much as we can. And it's an extremely nice amenity and highly appreciated compared to using data on their plans, okay? Anytime I go somewhere they got free Wi-Fi and they let me plug into it, I'm pretty appreciative of that. And I look for it. Part of it is because I have Spectrum and I buy data, I get $14 a month service if I don't go over their 1 gig now. So, there's more, as time goes on, there's gonna be more and more propensity for that as data becomes monetized and then, and how much data is being used and so forth. My kids, they just, no matter what they do, they just buy the unlimited because they're just gonna blow it out. But there's some folks out there that could appreciate that. So we don't have it at Phoenix. And we don't have it at the city park in probably, like the back of the fishing pond, would it have, so it's predominantly right around the fields, around
Concession stand.
the concession stand, okay.
Yes.
Right, and so that kind of, to build on that, I think that is something that we need to look at very closely as we go on. I don't know what the cost is, because to be quite honest, to put repeaters, I don't know how you would do it, but down by the lake, for example, and so forth, it may be a lot more costly than we think about, but it was definitely is an amenity that I think people would appreciate that may not be that expensive.
It is my understanding that the Wi-Fi that we get from Camden County Library does have a wider bubble than our own. So I think it does extend some down into the soccer fields, but beyond that, you're right, it does not.
Mm-hmm.
And
Can we build, do you know if we can expand their service or would we have to do something else? Do you have any idea?
I can certainly ask.
Yeah.
I know they offered it to all 3 of the cities, Eldon, Camdenton, and Osage Beach, but they made it clear that they were only going to do it in one park. And so obviously we chose City Park since that's our signature park. The other thing I would warn you about is all the internet that is provided for free at the city park is unsecure. So that's one other thing you want to keep in mind as well.
Welcome
Most
to
free
all
Wi-Fi
public
is.
free Wi-Fi, Mike.
is.
Right, most free Wi-Fi is, I mean, you know, like,
Use at your own risk.
That is a valid point, though, in the industry, like it or not, everybody has a phone in their hand. And how do we utilize that to get kids out into the parks? You know, there's several different options. On walking trails, you have QR codes that they can stop and scan, and it identifies local plant species or a point of interest. And that's things that I'm looking at down the road, but it's a valid point, you know. Get them out there any way you can.
Aren't we ultimately at the mercy of our service provider? I mean, we can't get internet installed where places that service provider isn't providing it to, correct?
Well, you can choose to pay for your own run fiber and things. That's how we connected all of our facilities with some of our own costs. So we have, because of where we're located in the city, we do have options to pay for infrastructure to expand.
But ultimately, there's going to be dead spots. I don't have cell service when I stand in front of my refrigerator.
You know, it's never going to be
For
perfect.
real, it's like a
but-
2-foot box in
But
front of my
yeah.
refrigerator,
But there
and
are
I've got
some-
T-Mobile as well, but regardless, there's always going to be black holes, dark spots, where you're not going to get the service.
There's options to expand mobile hotspots and, you know, or fiber or different things, because I grew up in rural America, and that's what I'm doing to this day on my own.
well, I mean, I think there's two separate deals here. One is cell service, and we're probably not going to be able to make it near the impact on cell
No,
service.
but the internet
But
for-
the internet, I think there's definitely an
Yeah.
opportunity for
And
us to
people have option
drive
to
our own
call
wagon.
on Wi-Fi. So even though you may not be able to fix AT&T or T-Mobile's expansion, if you provide Wi-Fi, there is Wi-Fi calling. So there's other technologies with every phone in your hand.
Oh, yeah.
I have friends that never call regularly. It's always Wi-Fi, you know, or whatever, so. yeah.
Just as an observation as we go through on the rest of the comments from the public, I see a pattern here of three items. Advertisement, not aware of what we've got, concerned about security, and concerned about security. And cameras, Wi-Fi, phone, those emergency phone call boxes. I mean, there's a number of things I see here, and it shouldn't surprise us, unfortunately, in this day and age. I mean, I can say this. When I left home, when I would leave after supper at night to go out and play down into the subdivision, I didn't have a cell phone, and Mom knew we were down there somewhere, and we didn't worry about cameras, but that's a different era, you know, and we're in a different time, and unfortunately, it's not the time I would like us to be in, but we are what we are, and so if we're gonna have the parks and we're gonna spend the money, we need to be tagging right along with that, the things that need to be done to help give them security, from lighting to cameras to whatever that technology is. That is something that I seen there. And
And I
I
think-
rattled for quite a bit, so I'll let somebody else talk now.
I would just go ahead and offer with the security one, that's another where I don't believe it's a one single thing that you can do that's going to go ahead and is going to calm that concern. I think it's like what you said, it's a combination of signage, it's a combination of lighting, it's a combination of, Wi-Fi service, it's a combination of, going ahead and putting speed bumps that are there to go ahead and get people to slow down. You can look at it from a lot of different ways, but I think it's just one of those that how you go ahead and address that just needs to be systematic in an approach, so.
Last but not least, I'm looking for the staff to come up with a plan, to give us a vision, to give us some plans on what we can do. I know that right now we've got some hurdles that are right in front of us as far as, just how much money do we have? Well, we won't know if we are going to have any additional revenue until after the April 4th election that we have with an issue on the ballot. But right now, we know what we have. We have some CIT money that is coming down the pike. So I'm just looking for something to where we have a plan here, and yeah, it's $30 million, and if it's a 30-year plan, it's a 30-year plan.
And that's
Mike, you're puzzled at what I said.
Well, let me add to that before. The end goal here is we aren't going to solve all the problems. A couple different things is, what is the direction at the board, what you like, what you don't like, what gaps are still questioning, like the mayor had brought up, getting into that financial of what are the categorized revenue generation to offset, what is the, even the non-financial effects of these improvements, in addition to the financial effects, probably more so than, drilled down to the percentages that they've put in there, because they have estimated maintenance and stuff. In addition to that, the direction we get from you or comments we get from you will also help staff not only putting that financial package together, what would be a commitment through the years if this was your end goal, whether it's 3 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever, but also helping us to prioritize. You can prioritize on what makes sense to be built first and second, but prioritizing what's physically ability to be built, and also then what's that financial stream look like in addition to the revenue. So I agree with you, that needs to be staff's next step, but we also need to know that, this is a working document, general speaking. This is, what changes or what the board's looking
Checklist.
for. So we know then how to proceed with getting into the weeds of things. So as we come up against the next budget or planning the next 3 to 5 years, it's kind of coming into formation, so we know what our guidebook really looks like, so.
The only other thing I'd say is I've had a couple of different aldermen now mention a $30 million number. The estimates in this plan only add up to just under 11.5 million.
Well, but there's a construction piece, and I know that if you add, this is what he's talking about, if you add those, it's like 11, 12, something.
Yeah, it's 11.
But in addition to that, what are the additional maintenance costs, expansion costs? And it's, if you're truly looking at all the pieces of the pie that go with this, then I don't know what that number would be, but.
Yes, ma'am, sure, of course.
I just remembered 30 million from the last time this was presented, and maybe that was a bad memory, because it's not getting better. I guarantee my memory's getting worse, so I may be all off base on that one.
Just the straight, on the very last summary page of the presentation from January 19th, City Park, Phoenix Park, and the dog park, if you add those up, it's just shy of 12 million. But that is truly just construction in present day dollars. So you add a future value to that, you add how that expands on staff, how do you expand on everything else, then you're still looking at some
A lot more than 12.
7, yeah, I mean, it will end up being, but as far as just true construction, that's
I know where
a
I came up
construction
with
piece.
that.
Period.
I came up with that because this is roughly 13 million, and I took in my own little brain and said, this is probably a 20-year project, and I amortized it out and figured it was 30 million by the time we were done.
Yeah, that's the present value.
That's where I came up with it. I apologize.
Future value will be different.
That's my little brain. That's where it came from. I had to think, how did I do that? But that's where that's what I did.
So now what?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I was going to have a question. Darren, right? Yes. I'm sorry. How have other cities done this? Because these meetings are great. I mean, a lot of times it's hard to sit through, but this is great information. But rather than keep having meetings, at what point in time do we need to pull the string and start doing something and start budgeting something? Kind of a timeline is 6 months from now, a year from now. What have other cities done?
So what we tend to tell people, and this is going to sound self-serving, and it's not self-serving, but you've gone through a public input process. This is the second time that this is in front of the board. We really do need to get to a point where the board goes ahead and adopts the plan as a whole. And that going ahead and happening before the summertime becomes important, or early summer. From there, you already have one of the key things that we try and encourage people to do in place, and that you kind of have a seed project, right? It's one of those, when you go ahead and you ask the public, what do you want, and what are you looking for, and where do you want to go? The last thing that they want to see is that nothing happens. One of the things that we were recommending is the idea of the pickleball courts at City Park. They're going to see that movement, and whether or not you were going to do that's something that's part of the master plan that's being implemented. And then from there, it comes down to what level of investment are you willing to make? You're going to get to the point where there's a lot of, I don't know if a lot's the right word, there's some low-hanging fruit, right? There's some easy things on here. Wi-Fi isn't easy. Signage, while it can be expensive, is kind of an easy. I think your highest priority is probably your maintenance building, but that goes ahead and that comes along with some costs. But you're also investing in your employees when you're doing that as well. So that becomes your process from now, is you go ahead and you find those things and you publicize the fact that we're doing this in response to the master plan, in response to the feedback that you got, in response to the feedback that the recommendations that our consulting team gave. And then from there, it becomes, okay, what are the big ticket items and how do we go ahead and how do we make those happen? Because the reality is, at some point, there has to be this tectonic, I use tectonic, maybe that's being too exaggerating, but there becomes a pretty big shift point, right? Do you go ahead and do you take Phoenix Park and say, okay, we're going to take those two triangles out of commission. One of them becomes a dog park. The other one goes to that All Abilities playground. Does that become the first shift because it becomes this huge impact on the daily users? Or does the first shift become going ahead and adding that fourth diamond that's down at City Park and the economic impact that comes from that? But there's going to come a point where that's going to be a pretty big decision-making point. But there's a lot of little things that you can do between now and then to get to there.
I guess that's one of the things I'm looking at from staff, they can come up with not necessarily a timetable, but the first thing is, what's number one?
Priority list.
What's number two?
That's what I
What's
was
number
asking.
three? What's number four?
Priority list.
A priority list was,
And then
that's what
once
I was
that-
thinking, that's what I thought the next step was gonna
Yeah.
be, was going back to the
Exactly.
staff to say, give us a priority list for all these projects and what needs to happen immediately versus 6 months, 1 year, 2
Well,
years.
if we just have it in a list, then we may get 1 through 10 done in 6 months or 6 years. I mean,
Yeah.
but at least if we have a pecking order, because like my own little brain says, well, before we take those diamonds away, I may want to put some other diamonds, some new baseball fields up before I take the other ones away. I mean, but that's the thing that I think that,
And that's why this has to go back to the staff, because you're in charge of the operations of all this. We talk about removing these 2 diamonds out of commission for X amount of time. We don't know what that means as far as impact for you and your staff and what that does. You're the one who's going to be able to know, okay, what are the priority items? How's that going to affect my staffing, my usage for this park, this park, this park? So I think as a board, we're relying on staffing to tell us, here's what needs to happen. I don't think you're getting any pushback on that, because ultimately, once again, you know the operations of it and how that affects you directly. We don't.
And in reality is, in 5 months, Eric's going to be starting his budget for '24. So he's getting a head start on that priority list, immediate and 18, 24.
All right, Alderman Becker's been sitting down there waiting.
Nothing important. Gina made a comment about what do we like, what do we don't like. I don't like the fact that we're net loss of 1 baseball diamond. We don't go out to Phoenix Park very often, but when we do, there's always a dad and a couple of his kids pitching to the dad's pitching to the kids, and they're hitting balls. I don't know if that is available, would be available at the big diamonds down at City Park to just show up if they're not, there's not a tournament. But I know a lot of local people use those diamonds at Phoenix Park. I mean, maybe it's just an educational campaign to tell them, hey, we have 4 diamonds down at City Park now instead of 2 at Phoenix. Maybe it's as simple as that, but we're still losing a ball diamond overall.
In answer to that question or statement, our tournament directors that rent the facilities basically from May, every weekend, May, June, July, even some in October and September, and they don't really like using Phoenix because there's such a lack of parking. They will use it if they have to, if their tournament's big enough. So the addition of the new baseball field is very important, in my opinion, at City Park. I understand where you're coming from, but we do make the fields available as long as we don't have tournaments scheduled. Anybody can come out and utilize it. It's their parks, and I feel very strongly about that. One thing I'll tell you, and it's not going to be a surprise, but the first thing I want to do, and you all know, we have Soccer Field 1, we have a new parking lot going in City Park, and the pickleball courts. We're hoping to find a contractor to do both, if all goes well, which are very much needed. We need parking. Our staff need upgraded facilities. My maintenance staff has been working out of their maintenance building with no running water since 2015. So to use the bathroom,
Pathetic.
they have to drive a quarter mile to
That's
the concession
pathetic.
stand. And so that right there is very relevant.
Restrooms, number one.
Not to mention safety. If something happens down there, they don't have any running water, or if they get chemicals in their eyes, with any number of things, pesticides.
Why would
They
that
didn't
be?
even have heat
Can someone-
until January of last year, and we walled in a section of the break room down there and put in a pellet stove. There was no heat.
Right, I remember we solved the heat, but why do we have no water?
I thought we did it, I thought it was in the budget for '23 to do.
Water?
So
These
again,
upgrades.
not to, but it's not going to be a
It's what
surprise.
it is.
Yes, that's going to be the first thing I'm going to ask for next year, going into this budget, so.
We don't have, I don't remember ever hearing that we didn't have water. Has anybody else heard that
Well, I
before?
did, yes, but I thought it was in in the budget
Help
time.
us, Mike.
Right, so in the 2023 budget, there is money to put a restroom down at the maintenance shed. And so the three of us, Dave and Eric and I, have been debating whether we want to just cobble together a bathroom and put it on the side of an existing maintenance building, or whether we want to do it right and just add a restroom to what is planned as an additional maintenance shed coming. And I'll, if you don't mind, I'll take that opportunity to piggyback on that and say, a timeline is coming. The three of us have already talked about a timeline on budgeting this kind of stuff and what years we're going to do what in. We've already kind of come up with some tentative ideas. We were going to gather the information we got from this meeting from the elected officials and add that into what we have already kind of got as our tentative ideas, and then bring that information back to you. It sounds like we're asking Darian to give us a little bit more statistical data. We can bring that data with us as well and kind of see where this goes over the next couple months and provide some additional data, whether it be timeline, information on future costs for employees, for maintenance, those kind of things.
Yes, sir.
I've got several thoughts. I'm going to try to organize them, but one, I guess I didn't realize we didn't even have water down there, okay? That was a new one to me. I mean, you're right, the bathrooms are in there, the pickleball courts are in there. And I guess I'm going to try to start more at a higher level and talk about the philosophy that was in here on page 2. And that is what we tend to have some redundancy between the parks. And your recommendation is that we try to minimize some of that redundancy and identify the Phoenix Park area as more of an amenity base and that the city park is more of an activity base. I think is the best. I think that's a reasonable way to put it. I don't know about the rest of the board, but I personally agree with that direction.
It was just, yeah, that was, and that was driven by feedback, but it was also driven by, can we create two identities for the park? So that,
Right.
yeah.
Along that lines, I think that, and we'll get to the details here in just a little bit, or in just a second. But I think one of the questions, and I can't remember, I think you may have said it at the last presentation, but that is should we be in the rectangles or the diamonds business? Okay. And what I see this going to is we should be in the diamonds business, and I disagree with that. And one of the reasons I disagree with that, if you look on page 33 and you start looking at the national trends, is that baseball is declining and soccer is improving. Now, the question is, if you ask me, should we be in diamonds or rectangles, I'll tell you we should be in both, okay? And we need multi-use fields, okay? And that is one strategy as we move forward that I think that we need to keep in the back of our minds, all right? Now, if this was a static park, okay, that we knew the probability in the next 5 to 10 years, the footprint of the park was not going to change, then I think this is a great plan, okay? Now, we can all figure out what the priorities are, not for tonight, but some other time, whether it's Wi-Fi versus, the lakefront or whatever the case may be. I do appreciate the comment, and I agree that, pick the low-hanging fruit, make some difference, and shows people that you're doing something. I agree with that. But the problem is that this may not be a static park, okay? We may have an opportunity for significant land use, and I think that when we look at, and that's not by any means guaranteed, and it sure as heck isn't going to happen tomorrow. All right, but that opportunity, if that opportunity could come, then there could be some things that would change the direction of this master plan. all right? And so I would think that, one, we start talking about whether or not we want to be in, is that philosophy the right philosophy? Two, do we want to be in baseball, or in diamonds or rectangles, or both, okay? And then three, how much do we want to invest in the city park over the next couple, 3 years? And by the way, you need water and you need a restroom, okay? I'm not sure you need a new maintenance shed yet, because we need to think about that, all right? But at the end of the day, because we're gonna have to put some things in, the pickleball court, okay, I mean, that's 150 grand, and as much as that's a lot of money, that may be something that we may not, could be affected someday. I will say that I wonder if in fact the field that we're turning into, if I understand it right, and there's a lot of information here, but we're gonna take one of those fields and turn it into a dog park, is that right?
No, nothing at City Park, well.
No, at
At
Phoenix.
Phoenix Park, yes, one of those
Okay.
will convert to a dog
And so
field.
what I would say is that's a lot of ground for a dog park. Now, I would think, but then I'm a cat guy, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, okay? But my point is maybe, is there an opportunity to have more than one use for that large piece of ground over there? Just a thought, all right? Kind of digressed into the details. But I would recommend that we minimize how much investment we make in City Park until it becomes more clear if we have any opportunities that might affect how we want to make any investments in City Park. Now, there's some minimum things that we probably need to do, and we don't have to figure all that out tonight. Let me look through my notes here. Oh, one of the things that I would say is that when it comes to Phoenix Park, and I've heard this for years, maybe that one of the things that we do is start focusing toward, some of our first efforts are focused towards how we convert Phoenix Park into more of an amenity park, I guess is the best way to put it, and the bathrooms need to be addressed. I mean, I've heard that one for a long time, all right? And so that might be, as we're talking about, quote, low-hanging fruit or initial items, something that we need to consider. I've never been in the bathrooms, okay, over there, but I think they must be pretty poor, because people were screaming about them about 6 years ago whenever I started getting involved in some of this stuff.
They've been screaming about them for 10
Longer
years.
than that, probably, okay? So we need to think in those terms, but one of the things I think would help staff and these guys, Dave, and I'm sorry, what was your name again? I'm terrible at name. Darren, is that we are we broadly aligned around this philosophy? And then if so, and some of the things like rectangles or diamonds, then that can help them bring back to you, that you recommended, Kevin, a plan that kind of addresses some of those philosophies and those thoughts. And I don't know how we get to that, but that is some of the suggestions that I have. How do we attack this? We may end up just approving this thing for right now, okay? And then in 2 years, if a lot of ground that we don't have today happens to be available, then we're gonna revise it. But this is a dynamic situation. It is not static. And I think that we have to recognize that. So what do we do over the next couple of years?
That would help, what you just mentioned there, I had a note that I didn't bring up is, how much property do we have, how much more property do we see that we might need? In other words, and is there, whether it's to one of the two existing parks, or it's the existing ground that we have, or should we be out there looking for a third one, or, I mean, what, if we don't need any of that, okay, I mean, that's, when we talk about the things that we think we want at the park and we'd like to see, again, now's the time to acquire the ground around us, rather than waiting for 20 years and the future board says, wow, I wish those guys would have bought that property way back when, before all of a sudden these houses were there, or whatever. So.
Can I offer a couple things, Mr. Ross?
Sure.
When we stepped out on this endeavor, we really did focus on just the two parks. So maybe that was short-sighted on our part. To the diamond versus rectangle discussion, what I would offer is that while some of those activities are trending downward in terms of day-to-day participation, you don't see many adult softball leagues these days, but the area where those are increasing in population or participation is the area that you're already involved in, which is those weekend tournaments. So when we made that recommendation to add a fourth field at City Park, it was with the idea that currently you have tournament directors that, even though you have 5 fields in your inventory, are saying you have 3 at one location and we want to be at one location. So again, I don't always explain myself the best. In terms of rectangles versus diamonds, the fact that you still have a rectangle at City Park would allow you to be in the rectangle programming business, which is to say, if you wanted to offer soccer programs, you have a space for that. If you wanted to do a flag football program, you have a space for that. So you're not completely eliminating your opportunities to do those programs. However, if you wanted to get into the youth sports business, like you are with baseball and softball, if you wanted to get into that business, it would require, okay, we're going to need at least 4 fields to do that. And in order to do that, then we're really having to talk about property acquisition. And then it comes into the idea, do we purchase enough that we could also do, maybe we could go ahead and there could be a disc golf course with that or those kinds of things. So I'm not finding fault with anything that you said, just kind of, I didn't want you to think that got lost in translation or in the process.
I think that because we have been programmed around baseball fields here, okay? I mean, we put baseball fields in, okay? Everybody thinks about, well, you know, we were having tournaments. I mean, I've seen the teams down here in the summer, and I mean, I talked about a time when, on a Saturday, I talked to a friend that was running a restaurant, and she said, we had 35 people, a group of 35 walk in on Saturday at 1 o'clock. Well, who in the world's that on Saturday? Oh, it's a baseball team. You have them, and so I think we can expand on that, but I think we're leaving a lot on the table when we don't talk about soccer, okay? I'll just say it that way. And so I think that we should be in both. That's why I said, and as we look, if in fact this board agrees that we should find a way to transition towards both, then we need to keep that in mind as we make any investments in City Park and we decide whether or not we're going to eliminate a rectangle and put in a diamond, okay? Because I think that we have an opportunity to take a short season that you're doing a great job with, and some predecessors too, of putting a bunch of people in there on the short season and taking that and making that season from March 1st to November 30th. Okay, and what that can do to us, for us, from a revenue standpoint, to help pay for some of these things that we would like to do, but right now we're scratching our head going, even whether it's 12 or 30, we still haven't figured out how to pay for either one. So, you know, how do we do that? Well, we have to raise our revenue, to be quite honest, if it's going to be a simple answer to how we do that. All right. So I don't want anybody to believe that I don't support the diamonds, and I don't know that it came across that way. I support both. That's why I said both. But I think that we have to be innovative, and you guys would probably help us with that eventually, of how we utilize the same space for both. Okay.
Alderman Ross, I'll just comment, and I'm at a bit of a disadvantage. I've only been in my position for 10 months.
Yeah.
In those 10 months, we've had one inquiry about soccer. And a couple stopped by and asked about doing a soccer tournament one weekend. I'm like, absolutely, I'd love to. And we didn't hear anything else from them. Other than that, there's a local restaurant that rents one of the fields out in the summertime, like on, I think, Sunday evenings, and they play soccer. Other than that, you have 3 very large spaces that we work very hard to maintain that are used by people letting their dogs run off the leashes and make messes, you know. I'm not opposed to soccer, but I do know there's very much a need for more parking, because on those weekend tournaments, they're parked everywhere. So
there's some room that we're not using. I don't really want to, digress into the weeds, and we can talk offline. Sure. I struggled with support in some of these projects in the budget that were in there because I wondered where it might go eventually. But it is what it is. It's been approved. We'll see what the numbers come back, and we'll have to make some decisions as those things come through. But I think that we have an opportunity to go way past what you're talking about from soccer locally or a tournament locally to doing something that is much more of a central Missouri to a Midwest destination for soccer. Okay? And I'll just stop there because I don't want to open up Pandora's box. We can talk more later.
Please.
I have a question. Is it possible to get the restrooms installed for this summer
Where?
at City Park?
installed. They're open now, ma'am.
No, I mean,
For your
regular,
maintenance shed, right?
Oh,
yeah.
that would not be a question for me, ma'am. I think that would probably be a Gina and Mike question. I'm all for that, but we did not
Well, what
budget
about
that.
even improving over at Peanut Park that I understand that they're really bad? I mean, we're talking about getting into the summer. Can we do something to rectify that?
Right now, we have a project in the budget that Mike was talking about, that bidding, trying to get a contractor to do both. But as this master plan, what my understanding was, is the master plan's like, okay, do we do this little fix now if next year we could get a bigger fix? But as far as, forget the latter that I just said, the budget that's in there, depending on when bid and when contractors get to it, there's already a project in the budget that at least addressed a bathroom. Now, as far as Peanut Park bathroom rehab, there is not something currently in the
Nothing.
budget.
There's nothing in the budget.
But I know it's in the budget for this year, but can it be done by this summer?
Well, we are in March and the bidding and the contractor's not been identified. My guess is probably not, but may still be this year.
It's
May
not been
be summer.
designed. It hasn't been designed yet. Is that what I'm hearing?
So if we're all talking the same, this,
It just seems
this
that-
came up that it was identified as a priority to get the bathrooms addressed.
Yep.
And then when the master plan identified that a new building needed to be added at the park, the question was, rather than doing an addition onto the existing building and trying to make a bathroom work, do we program a bathroom and locker room and employee area into the new building? And I think Eric kind of thought about this for a while, but said, I'd rather wait and get this done correctly than just try to fit these new improvements into the existing building we have. Eric, is that fair?
That is correct, and I actually talked with the staff. I said, do you want to try to rush in and just add a bathroom to the existing facility, or do you want to wait and as we expand? And it's not necessarily just about the bathroom, that's priority. I mean, we got to take care of our staff, but our storage, we have no storage down. We have very expensive equipment, and a lot of it that we try to throw tarps over and everything, but it's just out in the weather, and that's extremely important to me. So, in answer to your question about the Peanut bathrooms, from what I understand, when they switched over to city water, I don't know how many, Mike might know, if years ago, that's when the flushing problem started. So I'm going to talk to the sewer department and see if we can address that before the on-season and we turn water back on in April. It's an older bathroom. We're going to put some more paint on it, cosmetic. I'm planning on replacing the toilets. I think if we do that, we could improve it substantially.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to piggyback on that, one other comment, we've had the sewer department look at the situation. We do believe that we've got an issue in the service line, and that's something that we're going to look at. There's technically nothing wrong with that building. I think there's really just some plumbing issues that we need to address, and I think those are things that we can address. Is the building aesthetically pleasing? Well, it's an old brick building. It's been there for 35 years. It works. If the board so chooses, we are happy to tear it down and build a nice new restroom facility. But I personally believe that we can accomplish quality restrooms with the building we have with just some plumbing improvements and spend our money a little wisely in other areas while still providing those facilities
Right.
in a quality way.
And what about the water?
The water at City Park?
You said there was no water.
Right, that's what we were just
Maintenance.
talking about down at the maintenance shed. So
Okay,
that's
that's the
still a
maintenance shed.
discussion we need to, the three of us need to talk through and decide. But I think ultimately, a lot of that information will come out in kind of a budgetary timeline that we provide for you. And then once we have that in place, if you guys want to move some things around on us, we're happy to accommodate, so.
All I'd say is that whatever you got to do, cobble up something, but get a bathroom and water source down there, okay?
Exactly.
I mean, whatever, it is what it is. There's some things here that we can't predict the future well enough to
Yeah.
know what's really going to happen.
That's ridiculous.
And hindsight's always 20/20. There may come a time that, well, if you would have known this, you wouldn't have had to spend the money and wasted that. But that's just, this is not a static situation. But on top of that, the question is, where are we at on timeline as far as getting those pickleball courts in? Because if we get those pickleball courts in October, November, then they just really haven't been valuable this year.
As far as I know, if I remember the timeline, Dave, I think that is in the design phase right now.
Yeah, and going by memory, I think that was scheduled for second quarter bidding. So
When?
Second quarter bidding, so it's going to be third to fourth quarter before they're
Yeah.
even finished.
Well,
Okay.
so
I got a couple things. As most of you know, I'm not big into waiting. I kind of jump in.
yeah.
So I guess my question is, and just so we're clear when we leave here tonight, is you'd said, Darren, the first thing is adopt the plan. So just so I'm clear, when you say adopt the plan, it's quite an extensive plan. Is it more of a, hey, we like the idea, we're going to vote to adopt the plan, and we can make changes? It does not commit us to doing a single thing, correct? Okay, with that being said, I do think we should do that as soon as possible. There's some things in there where you can pick and choose, and the low-hanging fruit, love that. What I don't like to do, especially with government, is you have meetings and you wait, you have meetings, you wait, and in 3 years, wish you would have done something. So if we can, one of you board members or staff or whatever, my suggestion is, let's get the plan adopted, let's get the priority list, and let's get started on this thing,
Can I make a suggestion?
please.
If the board wants to do a formal, I would recommend a type of resolution to say that would be the best. That's a one meeting, can be done pretty quickly. Or a motion, you could do it as simple as a motion, but I think a resolution.
Resolution?
A resolution to like, this is our intent, this is, the plan. You're right, it's a working document, updating data, changing, because every budget, like any other master planning, as we go through each budget line and predict the next 2 to 5 years, kind of changes the priorities, but a resolution can be
Good.
drafted and
Excellent.
put on as soon as possible.
And then start picking it apart and get working on it.
I think having staff coming up with a priority list, not necessarily a timeline, but because you're going to have to come up with a priority list in order to develop a timeline. But I think a priority list would be helpful just to see. I'm not going to pick it apart. I just want to see. I shouldn't say, I will have comments. Yes, I will.
Really? Surely not.
Really?
But I think, just the fact of being able to see where you're thinking, how, what the priority of things are would be nice just to see that.
And I don't think it's
So-
out of the question to say that we could have that priority list available when we do the resolution.
Good.
And I was gonna say, because Richard's really good at this, when are you gonna have this done?
I was going to ask it
Amen.
again.
Well, okay, so in my mind, the next available meet, not the 16th, because that's coming up, but as early as the first meeting in April, if that gives Eric and Dave and Darren for sure, and I say Eric because he's the operation manager, kind of gives some tasks, as early as that, but if not the second meeting in April, that ought to give us time to enough big picture, priority, any little minor updates that we want to make to the data and that carries through, and then a resolution, so.
And then another thing I want to say is going back to what Alderman Rose was saying too, and Eric, we've all been in restrooms that we don't like. Anything you can do with the budget given right now, whether it's paint on the wall, a thorough cleaning, the new toilets, without spending tens of thousands of dollars, so that the people that come here to visit or the
Right.
local people can go in there and it's not horrible. Let's get that done, please.
What we don't, we want them to remember our park, not for our bathrooms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I agree with that.
That's a good goal.
Can I add one
Thank you,
thing?
Mayor.
Yes, please.
So this is not from your attorney, this is from a resident with a 3 and a 5-year-old, but one thing that has not come up so far has been the playground very much. And I'll just say that, we talk about being a great city, not a good city.
Yeah.
Our playgrounds, and this is not just the city, this is the Lake of the Ozarks. Our playgrounds here are average at best. They're not good, they're average. Lebanon has 3 or 4 that are better than any here. Jeff City has 4 or 5 that are better than any here. And that's something that,
We need to concentrate on.
that would be something just, and it hasn't really been discussed, but I saw that you had the list of every single comment in there. And playground, after I think walking, I think playground was the most common one. And especially right now with Phoenix being down the one, having been ripped out, we've got the one in the state park, we've got ours, Phoenix and City Park, we've got the ones out on HH, and none of them are awe-inspiring.
I've taken to Osage Beach Elementary behind the school because
My
it's nice.
my kid's school playground behind church is
Yeah.
better than anything,
Well,
any
I hope-
public park.
I'm
Right.
hoping Eric's priority list will include that.
Good.
Absolutely is, and I agree. I mean, I think the emphasis has been, on baseball, on your sports, and I think we lose track of the fact that it's a park. It's for people to go for outdoor recreation, to bring your kids, most of all, and we can do a lot better. We recently toured Jefferson City Parks. You're absolutely right. The first facility we visited was one of their playgrounds, and it was very impressive. I mean, zip lines, I mean, you name it. So that's the direction I want to go in, and I absolutely agree.
The setup at Phoenix Park with the All Abilities Playground, the pavilion, and the splash pad, we've done setups like those before, and those are extremely popular for exactly the type of events you're talking about. Those will get rented out for birthdays. They're very popular and lots of use. So I would see that All Abilities Playground becoming your featured playground in the city.
That's what I thought too.
Super.
With picnic tables around where the families can sit and watch the kids play and be in the splash pad too. I've already got it envisioned.
Yeah, we've been talking about bathrooms at Phoenix, the new pavilion by the splash park, the playground, that includes bathrooms also. So.
Anybody else have anything from the board? Anybody from the public out there?
Yes, just one.
Yes.
Well, a couple of thoughts. So we just relocated.
Would you mind, I'm sorry, the microphones for our people at home and, yes, please.
So we relocated, I don't know what that
Yeah,
does.
it's on. Red's on.
Yes.
Red's on, okay. No green, green would be more obvious. So we relocated here. Memorial Day will be our second anniversary. We like it, but it is a smaller town, so some of the things we were used to, we came from Bolingbrook, Illinois, western suburb of Chicago. It's around Naperville. It's about 80,000 people. Our park system, they win national awards constantly, but they did have a goal and stuff. Some of the discussions here have been around teams coming in and stuff like that. And, you know, that's all well and good to run tournaments, but I think you're kind of spending our tax dollars and not, you know, I'm not worried about hosting a tournament. There's Baseball USA or whatever in Camdenton that can do that easier. I mean, they're built for that. To your point, Alderman Ross, on the pickleball maybe not coming in until the third or fourth quarter. One observation I would have for people is, yes, it's late in the season, but as people mentioned, in the dead of summer, it's hot. I am retired too. And yes, we'll go out earlier in the day and maybe later in the day, but now you flip that to September, October, November, and now you get people that are coming in the middle of the day when it finally warms up. And we're in a freak February here. I mean, 70 degrees last weekend. So they will get used. My old next door neighbors moved to Pelican Preserve in Fort Myers, Florida. Pickleball is huge. I mean, I don't play currently, but it's a big thing. They are repurposing one of their softball diamonds, actually moving it, and to put in because they can't even with reservations get, it's a 55 and over community. The funny part on that is the softball players are really mad, and my old next door neighbor Troy is like, there's 12 or 15 of you, and there's hundreds of people who want to play pickleball. It will be dynamic, as everyone said. In our subdivision park, we had a sand volleyball court. It didn't get as much use. There's plenty of tennis courts around here that tennis was big. I mean, everything's, when did pickleball even come on the radars? You know, I used to play volleyball and racquetball courts. Grew up, the Chicago firefighters used to play handball. I don't think, maybe some people in this room, because you're closer to my age, but no kid has even heard of handball, let alone play it. So the dog parks, yes, they do need to be big. They usually segregate the big dogs and the little dogs. Our subdivision, I straddled Will County and DuPage County. They both had them. Forest Preserve, that was one of their revenue generating things. Pretty much everything just came out of our taxes and it was provided for you. But I believe that would be a Field of Dreams thing. If you build it, they will come. We're at the lake. There's a lot of people with dogs. They have beautiful lakefronts. Their dog can't even play in the yard. It's like this. You go there, you can look them up. I'm sure Jeff City has them where they have the fee structure. But I looked up the Will County one while I was sitting in the audience. For people who come in, there's a $5 a day usage. Some people won't do it because people are people. But the resident all year was $40. So it's not like it's a huge burden for people that are here to have a place to go. But we don't have a dog any longer. We didn't have it. I went in there on my motorcycle one day, and I thought they were all having a gathering, and they were having like a picnic because they all had those igloo coolers. Well, all of a sudden, one guy, they flip them open. They're full of water for the dogs, and they all bring them because they don't splash around when you're trying to do it. And you don't, so I think that's a great idea. I don't have a dog right now, but I guarantee that will get use. If you look anywhere else, it gets plenty of use. But I'm excited that they're changing things. I mean, my kids are in their mid-20s now, but I mean, they were in youth sports. I coach youth sports. We utilized all our parks. We tried, every opportunity. One of them, they worked with the school and the park district. And when they redesigned the whole thing, the school got priority during the days, and then we were allowed to use it on nights and weekends. But it was a win-win situation. The school had the land, and the park district had the money to make the land nicer. So.
Interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming out tonight and expressing your views.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Yes.
Yeah, like I said, I was interested.
If you don't mind, put your name so we know who you are.
Sure.
Not that we're going to track you down, but appreciate you coming out.
Cameras everywhere.
Appreciate you coming out. Any other comments or questions from the board?
So I guess I have a funding question, and maybe we don't want to get into that. Is it normal to charge to use a city park? And the reason I'm asking, I pay taxes. I pay taxes to the city, to the county, but yet the city wants to charge me for the park that's in my city in order to use it. I'm struggling with that.
Well, I know Darren probably can have a bigger, I'm gonna start, but I'm sure Darren, as far as the consultant, has that. There are certain specific uses that there should be an expectation that the user provide financial assistance for that use. So if a baseball tournament wants to go on, those users are paying to help nail down that time, nail down that place, have it prepped for them to have a tournament. Other than that, the public's welcome to use those fields, but as far as the idea for reservation, like you rent a pavilion for a birthday party, to have that reservation for that specific time and place for that to be available for you to do your hour, there's where that expectation of the user financially assist in the use of a specific use of a facility. But to enter our parks to pay an entry fee, no, we are in the service of providing something for our community, but there might be specific uses that the user themselves would likely contribute to.
Or like what the gentleman was saying, I believe you said it was $40 a year for the dog park.
For a dog park.
Dog
So
park.
again,
And
didn't
some of
my
those would
sales
be the
tax that I
direction.
Chicago,
pay for
Tyler.
that? I mean,
Some of them might be the direction of the board, like just like our ambulance service, we choose to have service and we pay for that the users themselves don't. So there might be a particular level of service our board says, no, this is for our community. But Darren, I'm sure you have some supplement to my
So
explanation.
I would go ahead and, in your explanation, I 100% agree with. When you're talking about paying to use things in the park, you're essentially paying for exclusivity within the park, right? You can go ahead and you can stop in and use a shelter whenever you want. You take your picnic lunch with you and you leave work and you go sit at a shelter and you have your lunch, and that's fine. You're not paying for that. You're paying for the use of that with your tax dollars. If you want to go ahead and if you want to have a retirement party for someone at a specific time, at a specific location, you're going ahead and you're paying for that exclusivity of that shelter. That's the best explanation I can come up with. Same thing with baseball fields, soccer fields, diamonds, all those kinds of things. You're paying for that exclusivity. Once you get beyond that, and some of it goes back to the general philosophy of the organization, we're seeing one end of the spectrum or the other when it comes to dog parks. Some people, West Lafayette, where my sister lived, they had a annual fee that they went ahead and paid, and it had a magnetic key card that they went ahead and they were just keyed in, keyed out. But one of the things that the city touted was that if there was an incident that took place at the dog park at a specific time, because of those key cards in and out, they knew exactly who was there and they could go back and they could figure out what took place. So for them, it became a safety issue. There's not a right or wrong answer. You have to go ahead and you just have to decide what you would like to do from a philosophical perspective. I will tell you, out of all the things that we proposed adding to the plan, the dog parks do come with some significant impact in terms of staffing and picking up and cleaning. However, we've also seen what people are willing to do in terms of sponsorship for some of the waste bags that go ahead and that are used at those locations. So it really becomes how you want to approach it and what you feel is appropriate. I will tell you that we're doing a project in Greenville, North Carolina right now, and this is not an apples to apples conversation, but it's a fruit conversation, so it kind of makes sense. In their community recreation centers, they have open gym time where no one pays a fee to use that facility. They also have basketball time in open gym time where people pay to use the facility. The number of incidents that they have and problems that they have are almost entirely associated when people are not paying to use the facility because of how they treat the facility just with the transfer of $1 from one person to the other. It's something to consider. It's not necessarily that you're going to make money off the facility, but how do you approach it?
I was just curious.
Yeah, no, good questions.
Those are, especially as you bring new things online, having those questions and asking them and having the debate about it is great. I struggle with the idea that you can make parks profitable. That's in very specific situations, whether it's a sports complex or something along those lines. But otherwise, you're talking about something that enhances the value of your community and provides opportunities. So,
To add to that, I come from the state parks world, and I think the last time I checked, there's 92 state parks. None of them operated in the black. Maybe every once in a while a trout park would show, but none of them. And historically, that's not what your parks, there's things that we can do to generate revenue, but it's not going to pay for itself.
Eric, if you would explain, a couple weeks ago, we had this conversation about the rental fee for a field, the prep, the time, the hours, the people, and during the whole tournament. Share that with everybody, would you?
So to prep a field for two people, if you work well together, it takes 45 minutes at least, because you got to drag the field, you got to chalk the field, make sure your bases are set up correctly because it may be different age groups, so you got to move them in or out. So there's a significant amount of prep time for these weekend tournaments.
In between games, too.
And in between games, yes. So say we have a Friday, Saturday, Sunday tournament. After the games are over with on Friday night, we have to stay there and then prep the fields. And if it's a 5-field tournament, and not only do we have to do the 3 at City Park, but we have to go to Phoenix and do those as well. And we have a very limited staff, so it's a very, very busy time for us.
And how much do we charge for that?
$100 a field. So one of the things that I'm going to work on is updating our costs to our facilities.
$100
because
a field.
From what I understand, they have not been updated in a long time. Other facilities, you go to other towns, they have, okay, do you want lights? There's a fee for that. Field prep, there's a fee for that. Now, I don't want a nickel and dime, but we need to be competitive, and we're not right now. That's why we are so popular, because it's a bargain. It is, so.
That's great information.
Yeah.
This has been really good tonight. Appreciate everything, the time you took. Thank you. Questions, comments from the board? Anything else? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Alderman Rose, do I have a second? Alderman Ross, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Meeting adjourned.
I got a meeting in